This is Gary Beller, Chair of the Advisory Committee for Non-Voting Taxpayers. Permit me to confirm that all members and persons anticipated on the agenda are present and can hear me. Members, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. So Kathy, you're there, yes?
Yes, I'm here, Tim.
And Peter Kahn, you're there?
Here.
Peter Hull?
Yep.
Don Green?
Here.
Bill Gardner? And I think those are our committee members. And I see anticipated speakers on the agenda. I see Tobias is here.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Tobias. Is
Julia's just on.
okay. Good morning, Julia. Hi, good morning.
I apologize. Good morning.
I'm just reading the script. This open meeting of the Advisory Committee for Non-Voting Taxpayers is being conducted remotely, consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of March 12, 2020, due to the current state of emergency in the Commonwealth due to the outbreak of the COVID-19 virus. In order to mitigate the transmission of the COVID-19 virus, we've been advised and directed by the Commonwealth to suspend public gatherings, and as such, the governor's order suspends the requirement of the open meeting law to have all meetings in a publicly accessible physical location. Further, all members of public bodies are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely. The order, which you can find posted with agenda materials for this meeting, allows public bodies to meet entirely remotely so long as reasonable public access is afforded so that public can follow along with deliberations of the meeting. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. This meeting will feature some public comment, I'm sure of that. For this meeting, Advisory Committee for Non-Voting Taxpayers is convening by video conference via the Zoom app as posted on the town's website. Identifying how the public may join. Please note this meeting is being recorded and that all attendees participating are participating by video conference. So please be aware that other folks may be able to see you and to take care not to screen share your computer. Anything you broadcast may be captured by the recording. All supporting materials that have been provided members of this body are available on the town's website unless otherwise noted. The public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda unless I note otherwise. We're now turning to the first item on the agenda, but before we do so, permit me to cover some ground rules for effective and clear conduct of our business and to ensure accurate meeting minutes. I'll introduce its speaker on the agenda. After they conclude the remarks, the chair will go down the line of members, inviting each by name to provide any comment or questions or motions. Please hold until the name is called. Please remember to mute your phone when you're not speaking. Remember to speak clearly and in a way that helps generate minutes. For any response, please wait till the chair yields the floor to you and state your name before speaking. If members wish to engage in a conversation with other members, please do so through the chair, taking care to identify yourself. With respect to items for public comment, after members have spoken, the chair will afford public comment to those members of the public that have joined the meeting via Zoom. Members of the public who wish to speak must state their names and be acknowledged and speak through the chair. Finally, each vote taken in the meeting will be conducted by roll call vote. And before we go on to the first item on the agenda, I want to just welcome other members who are also on the call, which I sort of recognized before. I see Denise is there, Denise Bronow, Chairman of our Finance Committee. Thanks for being here. Robin, I see you're here. Let's see who else. Doug Rose, you're here. Jane Delano, welcome. Howard Dickler. Gee, I haven't seen you at our meeting before. I see you speaking at a lot of the town meetings, but welcome to the meeting. And I think those are the people who are now all participating. So let's go to the first item on the agenda, which is merely the approval of the agenda. Can I have a motion from one of the members of the committee to approve the agenda? Peter, yes?
Yeah.
All in favor, just say aye. Let me see your hands. Your hands are all up.
Right.
Members of the committee, okay, we have that approved. Next item is the approval of the proposed minutes for the meeting of January 16. Those were extensive meetings. A good job, Kathy, on getting those meeting minutes together so quickly. We had a good discussion about our island home, and I'm glad they asked us for our input, and I'm sure it's now being included with all of the other comments that they have been collecting from other interested groups on the island. Anyone have any comments on the minutes, would like to change it, or someone make a motion to approve?
Move to approve.
Don, okay, make a motion. Who's seconding that?
Second.
Peter? Okay, all in favor? We see your hands again. Everybody's hands are up. Okay, approved. Thank you. Okay, so we finished the meetings, and so now we're going to talk about, we have a presentation by Act Now. We have Tobias and Julia are here today. We appreciate that. They certainly have managed to get the attention of a lot of the folks on the island, and that's good. As Joe Biden suggested in his inaugural speech the other day, it's okay to disagree, as long as we keep it all civilized. Disagreement is when people can hear other people's views, and I know we have folks here that would like to comment on that. I have some of my own thoughts as well, but I think I'd like to start off with, I think, to allow the folks at Act Now to, they said they have a 15-minute presentation, and I'm glad to allow Julia and Tobias to take the floor for now, and you can make your presentation so we all understand exactly what your proposal is.
Beautiful.
You'd like to start, Tobias? Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, everyone on the board for joining today. I've sat through a number of these in a past life, and I've always really appreciated the feedback coming from our non-voting taxpayers. So to start off, Mr. Chairman, you mentioned how we really got the attention of folks. I think that's such a great point, because this issue of short-term rentals is something we've really all been facing. For me, this subject really grew out of a lot of the huge concern the community has had around South Shore Crossing and 40B developments, which I know a number of folks in the summer community are deeply concerned about, the overdevelopment of the island. So 2 years ago, I put forward an article to fund various affordable housing projects that would get us into safe harbor so that our zoning wasn't being overrun, and we wouldn't continue to see our zoning circumvented for large housing developments like South Surfside Crossing and Richmond and Beach Plum. So this article came about through some extensive research looking into the impacts on affordable housing, on our summer residents, on the nuisance caused by short-term rentals, and just generally a national trend we've seen where the vacation homes are really turning into hotels, and they're destroying the summer communities and also the year-round communities. And so a number of different communities have either banned short-term rentals outright, like Boston has. Some of them have put in various other restrictions. And so we're trying to find a middle ground here that we think everybody can agree on once they look at the data. So I'm going to have Julia now walk through our little presentation, but I just wanted to kind of give that background that we're kind of leading into this. I'm a 8th generation Nantucketer, and I've seen a lot of changes on the island from, there's not a lot of scallops to catch anymore. They're dying. Our costs for sewer are extensive. Our costs for schools, we're becoming an overdeveloped island, you could argue. And I know for my family and every local person I talk to and every summer person I talk to, they are just in love with this island. Nantucket is such a magical place. And so we're looking to find a tempered approach to keep it that way for all who love it so much. So with that, Julia.
Thanks, Tobias. I'm actually going to share my screen if you don't mind, and just have to go to the background of what we've been looking at how we've gotten to where we are today, proposing this short-term rental bylaw. I think that I'm going to skip a little bit over some of the details about Act Now, but I know you can go to our website and find out who's involved. Peter McCausland is still our biggest funder, although we are growing a number of supporters and funders. Tobias is our chair, and we are growing the board. It's still a very small board, and growing our staff. I think that you all have read the paper perhaps, and maybe hopefully gone to our website, but we are, it's not the first time that an organization comes onto the scene that is looking to sort of protect Nantucket. I think there are a number of organizations that exist currently. You could look to the Land Council, you could look to the Conservation Foundation, you can look to a lot of organizations on the island that are looking to protect Nantucket in one way or another. And we really think that there was a void for looking at some of the structural issues that are going on and sort of overlapping over all sorts of topics. And it's really about the growth that's been happening on the island and the speed at which we've been growing and the impacts that are resulting from that, and trying to see if there are some measures that we can take, just like the way that the land bank was created, the way that the HDC was created. There are some very strong and good measures that were adopted that have kept Nantucket to some degree protected, but we sort of can't stop fighting that fight because the outside forces are just that strong. And Nantucket is no longer an undiscovered place. It's now a very, very trendy island. And when that happens, all of a sudden, all of the money from around the world, frankly, but it's certainly in the US is saying, well, is there an opportunity for me on the island? And short-term rentals is a place where we landed some of our first research. And the reason is that it really does impact development. It really does impact housing, which are some of our core focus areas. And it certainly impacts infrastructure and the environment. And, the way that we've approached this is we really haven't been able to have this conversation until recently because we really didn't have information about, frankly, I'll step back a second. The traditional way of renting your home as a vacation rental has been around for longer than I've been around, certainly. And it seemed to be working perfectly fine. But in the last 10 years, and you can look to certain things, certainly Airbnb and the platforms that have changed the way that guests interact with owners or managers, certainly the low interest rates and a favorable tax code have also meant that real estate has been an investment class of choice. And then in the last few years, Nantucket may have been eyed more so than other communities because we really haven't put in any restrictions in terms of short-term rentals. And so when an investor looks around the country as to where they want to go, that would be one of the things they would look at is whether there are restrictions. And I'll talk a little bit about other communities that have done some things a little bit later on in the presentation. So the reason we can have this conversation is because in 2019, or actually December of 18, the Baker administration in Massachusetts enacted a legislation to enable local authorities or municipalities to both collect taxes from short-term rentals, and that means they expanded the lodging tax to short-term rentals. I think most people are very aware of that, which is basically bringing us on par with other states who've been doing it for a very long time. Like the state of Maine has probably been doing it for over 10 years. So, it really didn't have an impact on rentals overall. But it also, what the Baker administration also provided is a toolbox, and I'll talk a little bit more about the tools themselves later. The idea here is some communities don't want them, and some communities absolutely want short-term rentals. And this legislation said to municipalities a way to legalize them, to regulate them, because at the end of the day, these are businesses operating in residential neighborhoods. So the first thing that the state did is develop a registry, which is very, very simple data tracking of owners and operators who need to register because they're going to collect the sales tax, right? And so as a municipality, we can request this information. So we've been pouring through this registry and requesting it every every quarter or so. When we first started this work, there were about 1,800 registered short-term rentals on the island, and now we're over 2,200. And so it's represented about 20% of the housing stock. And, not surprisingly, the large majority of the owners are off-island individuals, obviously not all investors. But we do have a growing number of investors. And I think more sort of alarmingly, we have a growing number of companies and vacation clubs. One that really sort of struck me as being something that would be a tragedy on the island is Marriott coming near us. Oh my gosh. So Marriott Homes and Villas, for example, is on the Cape. They have currently 106 homes listed for rental. And you can imagine in the wintertime, the number of rentals are clearly, the number of active listings are usually much lower at this time of year than maybe even a few months from now, certainly on the Cape. They're already on the Vineyard. And if you have any sort of gray, if in your mind it's a gray area, this is clearly a hotel in your neighborhood, right? In terms of it's a Marriott. And so, we don't have, as a town at this point, as an island, we don't have any protections to stop this. We banned chains a few years ago, but this doesn't really fall under that premise. And so this is, part of the way we're looking at this is what's happened already, the changes that have occurred already, but really what's coming is, I would say, just as alarming, even not more so. And sort of why is this an issue, that there's a transformation in the short-term rentals and that there are more of them and that more of them are investor owned? The concern certainly in terms of the year-round community, and I think that for summer folks, having a strong, vibrant year-round community is very important. And so we have had an open drain, the water's been flowing, and we're losing our year-round housing at a speed that is not something that we're even scratching the surface in terms of fixing the issue. So this is data coming from Census and ACS, the American Community Survey. So it's the data that the town uses for housing production plans or for housing needs assessments and whatnot. But it tells us that from 2010 to 2018, we lost 500 year-round homes. And over the same amount of time, we grew our housing units by 1,100 in terms of, they call them vacant. Okay, well, it could be a summer home, obviously, it could be a second or third home or whatever, but it also could be a short-term rental. And so we know we have a structural issue, and we know that if we keep on this path, we're really going to start having major problems, and we already do. So if we do this for another 10 years, for example, we'll have lost 1,300 year-round homes. If you think about the amount of people that's displacing, what we're finding is that there's a growing number of folks who are living in sort of overcrowded situations, if you like. It's a difficult topic to approach, frankly. When you talk to folks who've been facing these housing situations, they talk about illegal structures and illegal housing. And when you get far down the road into that situation, it's a very hard problem to tackle, frankly. So we're trying to lessen the burden on year-round, losing year-round homes. And so far, I can give it to you in another way of saying it. It's really a game of musical chairs where we're losing about over one year-round home a week. But as you know, our population has been growing. The Nantucket Data Platform has shown us some great data in the last few years. And certainly the effects of the pandemic have accelerated this trend so that, we don't have the information on that impact. But what we know is that so far the answer has been to build. And so if you think about it this way, let's say a year-round home is built or is currently a year-round home. If 10, 15 years down the road or less, it's sold and becomes a seasonal home or a short-term rental, we all of a sudden need a new home. Well, it's a cycle that's been accelerating. And I think that the community, both the summer and the year-round residents, have been pretty vocal in saying that overdevelopment is not something that is ideal for anyone. And if we can retain the year-round housing, that would be a much preferred avenue, frankly. So what's been sort of going on the field, if you like, is that, you know, when we pour through the data, we definitely see that investors are converting some of the year-round homes into short-term rentals. And what does that really look like? So if you look at some of the neighborhoods, you might find that we have clusters of short-term rentals. I apologize, there's a little bit of an issue here with my slide, but Cato Lane is an area that's really transformed. Maya Comet, which I'll touch upon a little bit later. Lover's Lane is an area that's transforming right now. And the developments that were actually in very year-round areas. So one of the most, you know, typically year-round areas off of Bartlett Road. We have had two recent developments there, both Finback Lane and now Gray Lady Lane, you know, that are sizes of lots that would be affordable, an area that would be year-round, and instead they're sort of being designed as mini resorts with a pool and amenities, and they're being sold as properties that are really not in reach of year-round folks. And so we're sort of we're pulling the rug from under the year-round community as to, you know, where do they go to purchase something that's within reach. And even the work that we've done that's been focused on affordable housing, like Tobias mentioned, some of the 40Bs that have come, not, you know, sort of despite our efforts to try to fend these off, we weren't in safe harbor for a while, and we have to still focus on that. But even those projects, you can look at Beach Plum more recently that added 40 units, 25% of those 40 units. So 10 of them were affordable homes and went to great, you know, to families, deserving families on the island. But the other 30 were all purchased by folks who didn't live on the island, although I think a couple of them may have transitioned to year-round over time. And we created more short-term rentals than we did affordable homes or year-round homes. So, you know, that's not really being effective either. I think from a neighborhood perspective, there are different neighborhoods are at different transition points. You can look at, I mentioned Maya Comet. This is an area where, you know, if you think about Darrymore and Delaney, where, you know, the transition to seasonal and short-term rental sort of done. There are other neighborhoods where it's sort of midway, and Maya Comet is probably the best example out there. And so what you're seeing is, you know, not surprisingly, the homes that were purchased at reasonable prices. If you look at the home in the middle of this slide, the middle example here, you know, was purchased by a year-round family for $865,000 in 2014. At that point, actually housed not only a year-round family, but actually had two rentals, like two year-round rentals. So when the community lost this home to sort of, I'll call it converted to non-year-round, we really lost 3 year-round homes, if you like. And so it sold in 2019 for 1.65 and is now a short-term rental. And, you know, I want to be clear. We understand that not every rental is an investor-owned rental, okay? But it is definitely clear from pouring through the information and the listings that we have a growing number of homes that are treated as an investment first before it's treated as a home or a second home, frankly. And so if you look at Tom Nevers West is another example of a community or a neighborhood that's in the beginning of its transition towards seasonal and short-term rental. And so these are all examples of, you know, in the case of Tom Nevers, it's really different because a lot of this land was sold in the 90s for, you know, very cheap. These homes were built, you know, at a time where things were much more affordable. And, you know, they're being sold at prices that are, you know, and what we're finding is some of these homes are being transformed into something that, you know, they're being upgraded and renovated to the point where they will never be lived in by a year-round person again. But some of these homes are not. And some of these homes, I think actually most of the examples here, other than the example on the far right, are homes that were left pretty intact, just transitioned to a different, you know, to different owners who are choosing to do something very different with the home. So is this good for the island is really the question. We understand that some folks will point to the fact that year-round rentals can have an impact on the economy. to some degree, but what we are really concerned about is the costs that have come with those benefits. So today, if you speak to any folks who you hire on the island for your, as whether it's your landscaper or your cleaning folks or your builder or any of those people, all business owners are now forced to either provide housing, so they are buying real estate, or they are subsidizing the rent for their employees in order to attract these folks and then keep them. And this has been a growing line item in business owners' budgets. You of course are, summer folks, bear the brunt of taxpayer consequences, if you like, of the tax bill. And I think that we can get into this a little more, but I can guarantee you that this affordable housing and the amount of money that we're going to be spending on affordable housing going forward is going to keep getting bigger. And the amount we're spending on infrastructure, the numbers are staggering. We have $440 million on our 10-year capital plan. The landfill, as you saw in the newspaper this week, is a huge problem and a huge dollar sign. And we have some serious issues in terms of the environment, all sorts of things, but you can point to water quality as being one at the top of the list. Certainly, we've got the PFAS issue, we've got the harbors, we've got a number of, the nitrogen and a number of issues that we're dealing with there that are going to cost a lot of dollars as well. And so, and then you look at the residents and they're bearing the brunt of, having to pay through the roof for homes and rents and living in cramped conditions, which frankly means that we're not keeping the folks in the year-round community that we really, that we love, and we're not attracting folks who maybe have the skills to be in jobs, at the town or at the hospital that we are, at the fire department or the police department that we really need in order to provide services. And, and the flip side is there's even more pressure on housing from the growing demand from the services to sort of turn over these, high turnover short-term rentals.
And Julia, if I can just jump in there to add to that, I think it's important for everyone to really contextualize this in a very clear way. If we're losing 65 year-round homes per year, the cost to replace that in an equivalent fashion is going to be around $50 million a year. If we look at the value of those homes that are transitioning from year-round to summer, it's going to cost about $50+ million to remain stable. I recently had a conversation with the chair of the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, and they are looking at, if they had a magic wand they could wave, spending up to $400 million to build a huge amount of affordable housing. So it's not just about development. This is a financially prudent way of going about this issue.
Yeah, thanks, Tobias. I think that's a topic that's evolving, and we're going to be hearing a lot more about what they think the demands are and what the taxpayers are going to be asked to fund. And we hope that voters will look to this proposal as something that is much more prudent in so many ways. And so I think that for a lot of folks, it's actually surprising that, and I don't think that the summer residents would necessarily be in that camp, but a lot of folks, it's actually surprising that we've been having a fair amount of neighborhood disruption. This isn't just about housing. The reality is that some of these short-term rentals are businesses, and they are in your residential neighborhood. And it doesn't feel like your neighbor next door. It feels like a revolving door of folks and noise and large groups. And when you talk to folks who own inns and B&Bs and hotels, they certainly say, well, it seems pretty strange that I pay thousands in landfill fees and I pay thousands in fire inspections every year, and I pay almost twice as much in property taxes than the residential rate. Yet, these businesses are not paying the commercial taxes, are not paying any of those fees, are not regulated, and are not even registered with the town. Yet they're affecting life in neighborhoods in ways that, you know, even in an Airbnb isn't. And I think that when you talk to folks individuals who are on the planning board or people who are in the business of either architecture or development, they really have a sense that this growing demand for sort of the cookie cutter, you know, short-term rental with the pool, the cabana, the outdoor kitchen, every bedroom has a bathroom. This is certainly driving what type of development we're building. And it doesn't necessarily feel like Nantucket. And it could be sort of anywhere. And I think that a lot of the folks who I speak to who are in those fields say, you know, we really wish that we could build with Nantucket in mind is one of the issues. I think that I just want to on the neighborhood disruption a little bit more, because I personally am surprised that we haven't had that the stories that we're hearing haven't come out to the public sort of, you know, until recently, and are going to be coming out a little more. And I think that it's something that really is an issue that we need to offer neighborhoods protections, so that the only outlet isn't to call the police. Even if it only happens once in a while, when we do have bad actors, we need to be able to have recourse so that, you know, maybe they put their rental permit at risk because, you know, they're causing all sorts of disruption. And so the ones who are doing the right thing don't get a bad rap and can sort of function properly. So the goals of, you know, Act Now approaching this, you know, we think that it really has an impact, like I've already sort of brushed over, an impact on a lot of the areas on the island, a lot of focus areas that we're focused on. And the goals of any sort of proposal we thought would need to protect first the ability for year-round residents to rent their home. As you probably know, there is a large proportion of the year-round community that needs, not just relies, needs this income in order to afford their home, their rent, and frankly, it's part of their annual budget, not just as a supplement, but as a core part of it. I think we also, you know, we'd like over time, it seems very critical to give year-round folks an edge in buying a home, and limiting investors being at the table every single time is certainly going to lessen pressure on home prices. We absolutely want to offer protections to neighborhoods. That's something that the town should be affording neighborhoods. And the proposal is absolutely not to turn the faucet off. Year-round and summer residents, you know, want to have the ability to rent their home part of the time at least to offset some of the cost. And that's something that's been going on forever, and it's something that should continue.
So you're ready to wrap up, Julia. You've used up.
Yep, I actually have just a couple more slides. I apologize. There are a number of communities who have looked at this in all sorts of ways, and New England is probably, or I should say Massachusetts, probably one of the last states to really look at this. You can look to Hawaii, California, Arizona, Colorado, Florida, but many more examples, Washington, D.C., where multiple, you know, the goals have all been to protect year-round, to protect housing and protect neighborhoods across the world. We have some resort destinations who have taken different approaches, and the approaches range from, you know, a minimum stay of 1 month on Sanibel and Captiva to a home that is constructed, can't have a short-term rental permit until 5 years after it's built in Maui. So there's really all across the board solutions. And I think that the good news is that Massachusetts has really given a toolbox that's really strong in terms of just being able to customize what kind of an ordinance we're looking at. And that would include, let's say, occupancy requirements, taxing schemes, limits on duration and frequency. So where the proposed bylaw for Nantucket is landing, where what we've submitted is that a short-term rental, which is a stay that's under 30 days, so anything over 30 days, like a month-long rental or a seasonal rental, would not apply to this. There are two types of permits, and the question is it a Nantucket residence home? And if it is, then that resident would be able to rent their home short-term up to 90 days per year. It's sort of, they can scatter it however they like over the year. And if it's a non-resident home, up to 45 days. And the reality is, this is a way to, we've looked at a million different, I shouldn't say million, but many different iterations. And this seemed to be the most in line with what the community wanted to be over time. And we're also looking at a 1 week minimum stay, which is the large majority of our rental market, and some occupancy limits and other, a few other requirements, but it's basically a licensing scheme, if you like, for short-term rentals, for all short-term rentals.
I think your time is up now. Thank you very much, Tobias and Julia. One of the things that I know members of our committee would like to speak, and members of the public as well. But one of the points you made was that it's important to a lot of the residents, part of their budget. And one of the notes I wrote is that many of our, first of all, as you know, we represent the non-voting taxpayers who pay 88% of all of the island's total real estate taxes, and probably 50% or more of the total tax revenues of the town. And what concerns many of us, and I'll let my colleagues speak for themselves, is the different treatment of our constituents by your proposed rules. And when you think about the people who need, as part of their budget process, to rent their homes, many of our non-voting taxpayer residents like to be there, they love Nantucket, as you do, we all do. They like to be there May, June, September, October, maybe even April or November, and they're only able to afford to do so by renting their homes in July and August, which your proposal would not permit. And so, at least in my own view, others have some different issues. The disparate treatment between taxpaying residents and full-time residents is completely unfair. I'm not even sure if it's legal. Doubt if it's legal. But and I'm not licensed to practice law in Massachusetts, so I won't comment on that. But clearly, if there was no way to separate commercial rentals from residential, that's the problem you run into. Yeah. If it was dealing with commercial entities, most of us would understand that. But a lot of our non-resident taxpayers are normal folks who love the island, want to spend as much time as possible on the island, and need those rentals. And if you want to stop short-term rentals completely or treat them the same for residents and non-resident taxpayers, differing with the commercial entities, that might be more feasible or more acceptable. Anyway, I think I'll let members of my committee speak. They might have some comments as well. So who would like to speak first? Peter?
I have sort of a question and a comment and a request. The request first, your slide deck, will you make that available to us? The comment is, I think a large part of the issue here is the definition of short-term rental. And it seems to me you've been overly inclusive. As I understand from, I think it's slide 19, that the short-term rental is anything under 30 days. And when at least when I think about short-term rentals, I think of something, a few days or under a week, the Airbnb typical thing where you are replacing hotel rooms with short-term rentals. And I think a lot of my concern about this, in addition to the discrimination issue that Gary raised between non-resident and resident taxpayers, is I think you have an overly inclusive definition of short-term rental. I hear from your presentation, that basically every horrible is due to short-term rentals. And I can't believe that. The water issue is due to climate change, amongst other things, and so on and so forth. In terms of losing the housing stock, what you're calling year-round housing stock, and by the way, I think your slide comparing year-round versus, rental properties, you're lumping again together seasonal rental and short-term rental together to make that very, very huge distinction that you're trying to make. And I don't think that's really appropriate. But I think that a lot could be cured here by limiting short-term rentals to short-term rentals and not including what are half seasonal rentals and what have you. Those are the things that are, when I look at this, I just don't see that short-term rentals are going to solve my backaches, if you know what I mean. And the presentation that you have is every problem that you've outlined somehow is a short-term rental problem.
Who else from our committee would like to, Kathy? Kathy, you're on mute.
Yes, I
By
unmuted
the
my.
way, Kathy mentioned in a note to me before that sometimes the internet goes out. If it goes out temporarily, I think we should all try to sign back in after waiting about a minute. Kathy,
Yes.
we'll go back in.
I'm sorry, I'm in a place where the internet has dropped out from time to time. So I just want to kind of tell a story here because I found basically I've been a seasonal vacation home rental. My house has been, we built it 30 years ago. It's never been a year-round house. It's always been a vacation home. We're retired now, and like Gary mentioned, just like year-round residents, we need the income now. We're on a fixed income to replace the appliances, replace the roof, put in a new septic system because we're not on town sewer. We can't afford that if we don't rent. And we are also not, there's this term summer rentals or summer resident doesn't mean anything. We are on the island every month of the year. We are at the restaurants and so forth. Shopping at Marine Home and using island folks to do the work that we need done. So the problem for us is that in every situation of the rentals that I've done for the past 6 years I've been doing them, not one of them would be permitted under your new bylaw. We're not a large property. We don't have sub-zero appliances in our home. It's a very simple family home. Our pictures are on the wall and all our stuff is in the closets. We rent to the kind of people that in your article in the Inky Mirror, you said you wanted to encourage, which is families that can't afford a full week of rental. And they're coming here, many of them, to see their own families. Maybe they grew up on the island, they're coming to see their families, or they're coming to a wedding, a family wedding, or a baptism or some sort of event. They can't afford a full week. A full week is $3,000, $4,000, more than that even. 3 couples, young couples coming to a wedding. So we have a 3-bedroom house. It's not a huge house. We have our own neighbors who will rent our house for family coming to see them. None of this would be allowed. The other thing is that by renting for the full week and making that a minimum, the situation occurs where, especially during the pandemic, we're advised to leave the home empty between rentals. If it's a full week, I'd have to leave it empty for a full week to be able to have new people come in. What we do is we rent 3-4 days, long weekends to families and young couples, and they come and stay. They don't bring a car because they can't afford it, so they use the NERDA and they use our bicycles and they use taxis and the local economy. They ride their bicycles to the beach, that kind of thing. And they come on the weekends, and then my son, who is a year-round islander, who is in the same situation where he can't afford his own home at this point, he does the turnovers, and he does it midweek. He's in the hospitality industry. In the summer, he works 7 days, so he needs to be able to fit that in during the week. If we need a cleaning service, they're available during the midweek to turn over a house. They're not available on the weekends because everybody's turning over on the weekends. So basically, we also serve specialty workers like the Bartlett Farm solar farming installation crew. They're specialty workers that came from off island, or they're working under contract for the town. And we rent our house all winter long to folks like that come in, and they typically rent Monday through Friday. That wouldn't be allowed either. They also come with their work trucks. and park in my driveway. 4 guys and a work crew, they have 2 panel trucks. That wouldn't be allowed because we're only allowed to have 1 vehicle parked on our own private property, which I don't understand. So all of the things that we have been creative in forming, and there are a lot of people like us, would all go away. So I don't know how we would keep our house in that kind of a situation. So we're lumped in with industrial investors and companies. You've lumped us in because you don't seem to be able to distinguish between off-island business that's investor-based versus people whose address happens to be off-island, although maybe we live here half the time and live in our other home half the time. So I think we all would agree that investor-owned rentals are really bad for the island and need to be taken care of and regulated in some way, but not on the backs of the folks who have been renting for years and in taking that away. So thank you.
I just wanted to say all great points and all things we are considering and working on. So thank you. We're trying to make this the best. So we really appreciate feedback.
Okay, I sent feedback in a couple months ago to you guys and I never heard back. So it was very disconcerting not to get a response that you'd even gotten what I sent you.
Anyway, Tobias and Julia, you hear that one of those challenges is to separate, be able to distinguish between the commercial activities and the folks like Kathy, who are island they're island residents in every aspect except that they're not resident taxpayers. Who else from our committee would like to speak? Anyone? Not, I'll start going to some of our guests. Robin, you would like to speak? Please go right ahead.
Hi, good morning. So Julia and I spoke for the first time this week, and I thought that was good. And I also want to say that affordable housing is absolutely a worthy concern. And I even volunteered to Julia this week to say, you know, I'd be glad to donate my time to thinking through, you know, solutions to affordable housing. But somehow short-term rentals has become the only beast and the only problem to solve the affordable housing crisis. And I think it is so misguided, this presentation. And I understand it is with, you know, I'm going to assume good intent, but on so many different dimensions. You know, you mention Beach Plum, Cato's Lane, Lover's Lane, Maya Comet, and that's fine, but you want to encumber and hit $3 billion to $4.5 billion worth of property. So, you know, in our discussion, I said, okay, great. You raised affordable housing neighborhoods, but how does encumbering a $6 million house on Eel Point help the affordable housing situation? So that's one. And also you know, the other thing, Julia, we discussed is, you know, I asked you, how bad do you think, you know, the Great Recession that we went through in 2008 to 2010 was? You know, what was the decline in the economy during that period? And you weren't sure. And what I conveyed to you is that number was 4.3%. That resulted in 11% unemployment. That resulted on Nantucket in property values dropping by 15 to 20%. So if you start to tinker with short-term rental stock on the island, which houses the majority of tourism, more than 75% of hotel room equivalents are on island, and you don't want to limit it to affordable housing, but you want to restrict the whole island, you are tinkering with an aspect of something that could have a very major impact on the economy. And the last observation I want to make is something that was just alluded to, this one car per house restriction. And so I wanted to understand, because I'm just trying to get up to speed in the last week. You guys have been working on this for, you know, a year or more. So I Googled affordable housing, 1-car limit per household. I couldn't find any place in the US that did that. Zero. Then, so I just limited it, and I said, okay, 1 car per household, vacation rentals, vacation. I couldn't find one city in the United States that did that. Now, I did find cities in the world that did that, which are Venice, Italy, and there are 2 cities in the Alps that are inaccessible by cars. But you know what, when I thought about this and I spoke to others, some people made the observation that this is an irritation with summer traffic that somehow got lumped in with short-term rentals, which does represent a risk, but it has nothing at all to do with affordable housing. So again, well-intended, I'm willing to volunteer my time to help on affordable housing, but wholly misguided in the application.
Mr.
Okay.
Beller, would you permit me to just address some of, because if we go through all these questions, we'll,
Okay, if you'd like to, we
Um,
still have time for more comments.
yeah, I know that, if I can call you Robin, if that's okay.
Of course.
Okay. Robin, you and I have been talking about a lot of things, and I think that, what I'll start with, the economy, and, we talked about 2008 and whatnot. I don't really want to make it about our discussion, but what happened in the Great Recession was a very different animal than tweaking, putting some measured limits on short-term rentals. And when we look at communities who have put in restrictions, they have not seen the impacts on their economy. In fact, they keep on flourishing. Otherwise, we would be reading about that in the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. Instead, what we're reading about is the impacts that it's having to housing and to neighborhoods, right? This is not just about housing. It's also about, the fact that we have businesses operating in residential neighborhoods. And one of the interesting things is that in Massachusetts, when the Baker administration said, here's legislation you can opt in locally. One of the things that the communities did who did not need short-term rentals and did not want them, okay? And they, Mr. Hale, I'm the one, I think you're the one who said short-term rental it seems too restrictive at 29 days. It's the state definition. And that's why we decided to follow the state's definition, because it makes it much more cohesive and consistent and simple, because the short-term rental tax is based on the 29 days as well. So anyway, so when the state did this, some of the towns said, don't worry, we don't need this legislation. We're just going to use our existing zoning, because our existing zoning already restricts businesses in residential neighborhoods. And so to some degree, regardless of where you are on this issue overall, municipalities in Massachusetts are facing the reality that short-term rentals are basically illegal in residential neighborhoods. And so they're going to have to somehow legalize the use or regulate the use or ban the use, but they're going to have to do something. And I sat on a planning call with some of the Cape and Island planning directors, and that was their view as well. This is not something that we're bringing to the forefront that is an issue that doesn't exist. It's an issue. And when we talk about the cars, I can appreciate that you think it's capricious to have 1-car limit. And quite frankly, I know you sent me something recently, Robin, and I was, it's going to be part of our next board call that, this is a question we need to look at, right? The feedback we got came from summer in-town residents who were very frustrated because large vehicles were parking in small town parkings, right? Parking lots, driveways, and being over the sidewalk, sort of, and having multiple vehicles was causing that. Okay, so it's having an impact on transportation and traffic in the summer when we see that rentals are, let's say have 3 cars or whatever. It's certainly having an impact, but that wasn't the only reason that was put in the bylaw. So anyways, Tobias, I know you may want to say something.
Yeah, just on the thoughts regarding affordable housing, we are working towards a number of different solutions as well. One of those is essentially creating a new mechanism to purchase the underlying land, take that out of the equation, and then that would, oh, Julia, it's not a land bank, it's called the land
No, it's a land
lease.
trust. Yeah, it's a land
Land
trust. It's on the
We're
vineyard.
working
It's
on
a,
setting up a new land trust on the island. So that is a piece that's a solution that's been successful in a number of other communities. So that's something we're working towards, and we're working with a number of affordable housing advocates on the island towards a various number of solutions. But frankly, short-term rentals are having a big impact on housing. So we can't not address it in some capacity. So that's that. And one last thing, I believe it was Kathy or it's town committee. If you were to rent your home, you mentioned you had like construction workers coming in the off season. If you were to rent your home, you know, for more than 30 days, it doesn't qualify as a short-term rental. So you'd be allowed to do that. And the same goes for, you know, those higher end properties. A number of them rent for more than 30 days. So they're not going to be affected by this 45-day minimum. So just 2 points, when you get into looking at the numbers, there's a lot of ways around this bylaw. So I don't think it's fair to say that this is going to have a huge impact, but then also when you get into it, it's not that impactful. Like we can all work together and reasonably say that there's going to be some downsides and some positives. We're not trying to say we're going to ban short-term rentals outright on the island.
Thanks, Tobias. Tobias and Julia, are you aware, I'm not, in looking briefly through some of these materials, I have not seen any community that has put in short-term rentals that has so openly discriminated against part-time residents versus full-time residents. I understand many communities have put in limitations on short-term rentals, and that I understand. Whether I agree with it or not, I don't have a dog in this fight. I'm not renting anything I own, so, well, but I understand that. But I don't, what I resent personally is treating the non-resident taxpayers differently than full-time resident taxpayers. If you could figure out some way to separate, we don't want the Marriotts either. I agree with you about Marriotts and other chains like that. And if you could find some way to distinguish those, then you wouldn't be penalizing the non-seasonal or the seasonal residents. That discrimination strikes me as being clearly illegal. And part of one of the things I'm going to ask our committee to do, we have a few lawyers on it, to set up a committee to take a look at that, because I can't possibly imagine that it might be legal to discriminate, to limit all short-term rentals, but to discriminate against seasonal taxpayers and non-seasonal taxpayers, I don't think that's legal. And but I, as I say, I'm not a Massachusetts member of the bar. I'm a member of the United States Supreme Court bar, but I haven't done that in a long time. But anyway, but that's, I think, your challenge. By the way, we all agree that we should do as much as possible to enhance the affordable housing opportunities on the island. And by the way, I keep thinking when I hear some of your comments that at some point in time, Act Now and our committee, the Advisory Committee for Non-Voting Taxpayers, ought to be joining hands, because we're interested in quality of life issues on the island. You know, we've been struggling to try to put some noise ordinances so that maybe in July and August, in the high season, on Sundays and holidays, that you don't have those construction trucks destroying neighborhoods. So far, we're not getting too good a reception on that. But so I think there may be some issues down the road where Act Now and our committee will be able to march down hand in hand together, but I'm not sure this is the issue. Any other comment? Yes.
Just briefly on that, we also have an article at this year's town meeting to ban gas-powered leaf blowers. Hedge trimmers and gas-powered leaf blowers were recently banned in the whole Nashop area, and in part due to our leadership on this issue. We're looking at hedge trimmers next. It's a huge issue for a number of folks just you're at a home and you just hear lawn equipment going all summer. So it is something we're working on as well. It's not just this one issue. This is just the big whale in the room.
Great, glad to hear that.
Mr. Beller, may I answer your question about the legality? Is that
Yes.
okay? Very briefly. So first, the discrimination aspect that you say.
Yep.
Part of the legislation, and I think that you can see this across the country. It's not just but different states treat, these rules differently, right? So different states have different stances, but you could look at California as being maybe a similar state, I think, because there's been a tremendous amount of pressure on housing prices there for probably even longer than Massachusetts as a whole, right? But in Massachusetts, there definitely is the ability to distinguish between either an owner occupied or a resident's home. Basically, the idea is it a primary home? If it's someone's primary home, then you have sort of the ability to say different rules for you. Boston, very different scenario, right? They have hotels they can send visitors to. They opted, number one was protect housing. They opted to ban non-owner occupied, period. So if it's not a primary residence, it is not allowed to be short-term rented, period. Salem, Massachusetts took a more measured approach, actually a little bit similar to what we're proposing. They have sort of a 45-day limit, and it's dependent on whether it's a primary home or not. So yes, and I am happy to share with you some of the cases and some of the, what's come up through the courts, because there are two big precedents in Massachusetts and certainly a large number at this, nationally. And I guess what I would like to say on that one is there are, if we don't, there sort of aren't 25 ways of doing this, and we cannot regulate. We cannot, the town can't say, you're an investor, you can't buy this home, right? You're a summer person or you're year round, go for it. That doesn't work. We're not allowed to do that. Land use is literally land use, so we can regulate how the property is used. That's it. And so this is where, this kind of bylaw really looks at, okay, so you can use it in certain ways, but maybe not in others or at other times.
Okay, thank you.
It would be helpful if Julia would share those pieces of information she just mentioned, the citations or actual copies of the things would be great.
Okay.
And on that point, I'm not sure the citations are up on our website, but there's a huge amount of information on our website. Our team's done a really good job on getting a bunch of info up there. So it is there.
Yeah,
Hopefully
those
more soon.
citations are always important because statements are statements, support is support, and linking the two together is great.
Gary, I think Delano's had something to raise.
Yes,
Go right ahead.
yes, thank you very much. And thank you very much to the committee for holding this opportunity. Thank you, Tobias. Thank you, Julia, for spending time with us. We're the Delanos, Jane and Jonathan Delano. We have been homeowners on Nantucket since 1979, more than 40 years. And frankly, if this resolution or this warrant were to pass as written, we would most likely be forced to sell. This is, I want to identify with the remarks that the Chairman Gary made, Peter made, Robin made, Kathy made. I mean, excellent comments. And I really hope, Tobias and Julia, you will take them to heart and find ways to really improve the resolution, because I don't think there's any disagreement about the overall goal. Certainly those of us who have invested in Nantucket for so many years. But I do think fundamentally the challenge is a failure, not simply a failure or a discrimination between non-resident taxpayers, homeowners such as ourselves, who have been paying taxes for more than 40 years on Nantucket, and those who happen to live on island year round. That's clearly one form of discrimination. But to me, it's the failure to discriminate between commercial enterprises that are engaged in investment on the island and us, because we are not commercial investors on the island. We are committed to Nantucket in so many ways. But in order to afford our house, and particularly since it's, make improvements, we've been doing substantial improvements, and to frankly, pay for college educations for children and the like. I mean, there are all kinds of things that we've been able to do because of our home on Nantucket. We have to rent, and we rent for about 8 weeks, maybe 10 max, depending on the summer and our own desires to spend time on the island in the middle of the summer. We obviously can be there in the spring and fall, but we need to rent. And the discrimination against, treating us like the Marriott is absurd. It's preposterous. And I would hope, Julia and Tobias, that you and your folks could go back and find a way to distinguish between homeowners like us and the commercial investors who may not give a whit about Nantucket except the money they make out of it. And there ought to be a way to do that would allow us to say, yeah, we support Act Now. But the current proposal is really, seems to me, very, it's going to be very hurtful to us, and I think to many, many others who are in our same situation. Thank you very much for the opportunity to talk. I appreciate that.
Robin?
Thanks, Gary. Tobias and Julia, I think we forget about, in some ways, the real history and beauty of Nantucket when we're focusing in on short-term rentals as being the bad guy. And what I mean by that is that Nantucket kind of tripped into a situation where it had a rebirth, which was tourism after the death of whaling, and that it limited dense hotel complexes, but the tourism was permitted to grow through residential short-term rental housing. That has been a feature of Nantucket since the late 1800s. Short-term rental housing represents more than 75% of the tourism housing stock on the island. That's the beauty of Nantucket, because it's allowed tourism to continue to grow while continuing to have this residential feel of the island. And Julia, you've cited a number of towns and cities that have imposed restrictions. And in the winter, I live in one, Santa Monica, so I'm well aware of what's going on there. But for every town you cite, which has limitations, there are 20 to 25 or more who do not. And it is dependent upon the diversification of the economy and the importance of tourism to that town. So I think the context is really important. And for every one that you cite, there are many more, 20, 30, I don't know what the number is, of towns who don't. And you have to consider the context, whether the economy is diversified, how dependent on tourism, et cetera.
So, Robin, I appreciate your comments. And I would add in there very clearly that when we look at Nantucket as a historically vacation rental, it was significantly changed when Walter Beinecke put in place the HDC, the land bank, bought up the wharfs downtown with a focus on not turning into a bloody tchotchke shop like the rest of the Cape. All right, he wanted to keep it looking nice, making nice. A lot of Nantucketers disagreed with him, but to help facilitate the community we have, because we had adequate regulations around what the island looked like. So I disagree with you in this overall historical sense that it just kind of magically happened. We got the community because leaders laid out an architecture for success and reasonable parameters, so we didn't have the Marriotts or McDonald's around the island. And Julie, I'll let you take the other aspect of Robin's comments.
Well, I think that if you look at, what's happened with the vacation rental market, it used to be a residential feel and it's turning into a non-residential feel. And I think that's the part that's really, inconsistent with.
That's fine, Julia, but then focus on, the commercial. If you don't want to have a Marriott in Hilton, that's fine. We all support you focusing on that. Or if you want to talk about, affordable housing districts on Cato or Lover's Lane, let's discuss that. But instead, you are talking about encumbrance on the entire stock of island real estate and hurting people on this committee and many others who are unaware. You've said you've had a lot of support. I've only been doing this for a week, right? I just got up to speed because I was alerted. I wasn't informed, even though I would be impacted. In the last 3 days, everyone I have spoken to on island, owners of businesses, is wholly against this proposal. And I had one comment, I'm just reading it now. Act Now is not for ACT. They are for their sponsors who are paying their salaries. That's, so there is, I understand you have your supporters, but there is a lot of pushback as well. If we want
Anytime there's proposed change, there's a ton of pushback. And
I understand, but if you want to focus on affordable housing, we support that. If you want to focus on summer traffic irritation, we support that. But using summer rentals or short-term rentals, which are the primary importers of revenue to the island, that is where we disagree.
Well, let me ask a question, Tobias and Julia. Was there any consideration of thinking that if it's just one property that someone owns, that would be, in other words, I don't know how this would, whether people on the island would like this or not, but suppose you said everyone has a chance to rent their own home as they wish for, the same short-term rules that residents have work for seasonal residents for one home,
Yes, Mr. Beller, yes, the answer is yes. And the reason we did not, so here's the reality. When you look through the registry, you find that there are a lot of one-off investors. Okay, so I'll give you an example. On Cato Lane, there's a property that used to be owned by the Lewis family, the funeral homeowners. This home in 2015 was sold to a gentleman in Florida. And so on the exterior, on the outside, it looks like somebody's home, right? But then when you sort of dig into it, you realize, okay, this property is a short-term rental, Sleeps 27. When you want to contact the person who is the operator, it's the commercial property manager of the owner in Florida who owns, he owns a bigger commercial property manager. This is not, so he only has one property on Nantucket, right? There's another example in Tom Nevers of a property. It's a small group of investors, but they only have one property on Nantucket, right? But they have multiple on the Cape. This is a business. There's no doubt. These are businesses.
So how is that the same as us, as the
No,
Delaware?
I understand,
It's
Mr.
not.
It's not. There's no easy way for when we were thinking through this, the clearest way to acknowledge you and your situation was to say, we have to allow non-residents to rent to some degree. And that's where the 6+ week is, the bulk of the summer.
I think
But
that.
we rent year round and we rent, it's also, why can't we be grouped with the year round residents and have those same limitations? Why make it different?
Yeah, no, what I wanted to say is that, Julia, in response to my question, your answer was there was a specific situation and there may be more than one, where investor groups have one home. Now, I'd like you to do some research. Tobias and Julia, I'm giving you an assignment. You're not on my committee. I'm giving you an assignment. I'd like you to see if you can figure out how many of those situations actually exist. If there are 800 properties on the island that would be affected by this, of which 600 are people like Kathy and the Delanos, and maybe 100 are the single entity where they have a group of investors just buy one home. Maybe that's a good solution. Maybe that's a good compromise. Maybe that's the way we solve this problem. We do better for the good. Don't let the perfect destroy the good. The good is to try to take care of people like the Delanos, like Kathy and her family. And if it's only, so I'd like you to get some facts. Don't say lots. That's what you said, there are lots. I'd like to know exactly what is the relationship between the amount of homes that are rented short-term by individuals like Kathy and the Delanos versus the number of group investors who group and they have one home. That way, you might be able to put that one home rule in, and yes, a few people would slip through, whether it's 25 or 50 or even 100. It doesn't really matter as long as the bulk of the people who are doing it in order to afford their ability to continue living and loving Nantucket the way they do. I think that would be a good trade-off, and I think you should do the research. That's my assignment for you guys. Any other, Howard Dicklow, you'd like to say something?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. For those of you who do not know me, I owned a vacation home, the same home I live in now, for over 25 years. And like many people, I rented it to help afford it when we bought it. So I have a great deal of sympathy for the feeling of the people that are on this call. I retired here in 2015 and live here full time. I'm an unabashed advocate of affordable housing, as is everybody, I think, on this call, because I think if you lose the year-round residents, if you lose the year-round community, and this could become a Fisher's Island, where everybody that services the island certainly doesn't live on the island. They all commute. And you should be aware that hate signs and hate bumper stickers have been circulating on the island that say, if you want affordable housing, go to the Cape. That is an attitude that exists here on the island. So in answer to one of your questions, because I've been interested in the same question, how do you differentiate somebody who's doing investing from somebody who is trying to afford their vacation house? So let's take the case of somebody who rents for 2 weeks, because that's the only time they can get away from their job in the summer to come, and they rent the rest of the time. And how do you differentiate that person from an investor? It's only 2 weeks difference in the year. And many of the properties these days, for tax reasons, are owned by LLCs. So you can't even tell from the ownership who owns the property. So that's a very, very difficult question. So I think since this committee has a great role to play in the affordable housing issue, there's two ends to the affordable housing issue. One is building enough of it, and the other is preventing year-round homes from disappearing from the affordable reach of the people who live here year-round. I think the intent of this originally was to put a brake on the insatiable appetite for vacation property. That is a key issue. How do you do that and treat people fairly? Because no matter what rule you put in, somebody's ox gets gored. That's the simple truth. There is no magic solution that leaves everybody whole and puts a brake on the appetite for vacation houses. So it would be great if this committee formed a subcommittee. We'd love to hear ideas. on how to do that. The Affordable Housing Trust would love to hear ideas on how to preserve those that we have, in addition to building a great many more.
Thank you, Howard.
That's all I have to say.
On my idea, if we had the one house limit, then maybe large groups of investors wouldn't be so interested if that all they could do is one house limit.
Actually, you can get around that in so many ways. If it's a group of investors, they just put a different name on every house. There are lots of ways around it. It's not an easy problem.
Okay, Donald Green. Don, you had a comment? You're on mute, Don. You're on mute.
Okay, now I'm off. My sense is that the approach to getting what people want on this island is more restrictive and some more positive incentives for building affordable housing. And it's not restricted to the island. This is a nationwide problem. So there's where it has to be solved, because housing is an immense issue for many people. And anybody who needs to live in a community and work in a community should have a decent house to live in. And that should be the thrust of any legislation. And the country is rich enough to solve this problem. So I think that's where the solution is going to lie. Locally, it is very difficult to turn this around.
Well,
There's too many people who have too many legal background to get around certain rules. So no matter what you do, they'll find a way to get around it. And instead of coming from the positive end, we're going to make affordable housing in these places.
we agree that we all want to help affordable housing. And what you're saying is maybe as the Affordable Housing Trust continues its efforts, they ought to come up with incentives for people to build affordable housing. Peter, you had a comment?
I have sort of two comments. One is my draconian, and I'll say this with tongue-in-cheek, solution to the loss of year-round housing on the island is pretty simple. And I think you could put it to the voters, and I don't think it would pass. And that is just restrict every one of those year-round houses that is lost. It's a year-round house owner selling it to somebody who doesn't want to make it into a year-round house. And so just restrict the ability to alienate your property if you're a year-round house owner, a Nantucket resident. You can only sell it to other Nantucket year-round residents. That would solve the loss of the housing problem. I say that with tongue-in-cheek, but in essence, it's the flip side of your proposal, which is to take people who, like year-round residents in Nantucket, have invested their life savings in buying an aspirational, perhaps retirement home on Nantucket, perhaps a vacation home in Nantucket, or both, and restricting them from continuing to support these aspirations in a very reasonable manner. So that's my draconian solution. You can laugh, you can sigh, but you ought to sort of think about it a little bit. Secondly, like Gary, I don't rent my house. So I don't have a dog in a fight in two ways. One, I don't rent my house, but I am bracketed. Everybody around me does. And I think Nantucket would be a less good place if in the days in the summer that I'm there, that my streets were not filled with all these nice people. And by the way, I was one of them, many, many years ago, who came up, short-term rentals, started with a week, pocketbook limited me to a week, and I got up to 2 weeks, and then finally I bought a place. Nantucket would be a pretty dull place without people coming to enjoy the things that we all enjoy in Nantucket. And by the way, there'd be less things to enjoy, because without the support of the short-term renters, you're not going to have the businesses that you have now. You're not going to have all the variety that you have now. I just think that you need to sort of separate out, how do we get affordable housing? How do we control what we can control on Nantucket? But this is basically talking about how do you finance Nantucket? And this financial instrument of reducing the amount of finance that comes to the island is, in the long term and perhaps in the short term, gonna be sort of killing the goose that is laying the golden egg for everybody every day.
Bill Sherman here.
Yes, hi, Bill.
Can I suggest a compromise? Compromise often gets you where you want to go, almost the good rather than the perfect. Instead of having the proposed article apply to generally to homes that are not primary residence, why not have the article apply only to those lots where there are two houses and the lot itself is not the primary residence of somebody? In other words, would the case of the Delanos or Kathy allow them to continue their rental if the one of two houses on the lot were barred from the seasonal vacation rentals that the article would apply to?
Thanks, Bill.
Comment? I say that remembering that the zoning code in addressing the issue of allowing secondary dwellings has a preface that indicates the limited purpose for which secondary dwellings are being allowed, but unfortunately that preface does not have a bite of law. It's just indicating the intention of the town in allowing secondary dwellings. They're not as favored as primary dwellings.
Yeah. I mean, there's another way that you could limit the effect of this. It's just, you could just say that when this law is passed, it'll be effective immediately, and everyone that has a home now is grandfathered, which will mean that you will protect the future of Nantucket from a continuation of the concerns that you have, which would be more and more homes that are owned by residents are being turned into commercial properties or commercial renting. You could at least stop the growth of that. It wouldn't ameliorate what's already going on, but if you're talking about the future, because otherwise I don't know if your article, your proposed article is fixed in concrete or not. I don't know if the comments we're making today is going to affect what gets presented to the voters. I don't know. I haven't even followed whether or not you presented it or got approval or any kind of recommendation from the Finance Committee. But it may be that by pushing a little bit too hard, you get nothing at the town meeting, when in fact you might be able to get something if you do some compromising, try to figure out whether it's the one house limit or it's try to distinguish between commercial and non-commercial. Otherwise, you're a little bit at risk. I don't know whether or not you will be successful at this point. I don't know whether you have concluded that you have enough votes. That, Denise, what do you think?
So Gary, what we've done is we've had one public hearing on it at Finance Committee. Robin attended. We will be having another one, and for Julia and Tobias, it'll probably be early March 2nd or 4th, as we talked about in our email exchange. We haven't made any motions on it and we haven't deliberated it in Finance Committee yet. And I'm here today because, well, it's always interesting to spend time with this group. And I wanted to make sure I heard what all of you had to say about this. So, we're still in the data collection phase of it. And yeah, so that's where we are. So I just wanted to pipe in with that. So you had the facts.
And what's that date again when you're going to undertake the review?
I haven't scheduled it yet, but I'm expecting it to be March 2nd or March 4th. So I can easily send to Kathy the date and then she can distribute it to all of you.
And Tobias and Julia, is there some chance that you would modify the proposal that you have put there, or is that fixed in concrete?
There's always flexibility. I think last time I went to the Finance Committee, just to give some context, I started off at 30 million. They whittled me down. I whittled it down to 20. And then the Finance Committee voted on 10. At that point, I had walked out of the room because I thought there was a bunch of hooey. And then we went to town meeting and it passed by overwhelming margins. So things are always going to change. They'll change through the Finance Committee process. They'll change at town meeting. And, I appreciate this feedback and Julia does as well. And we're all in the same boat together to make Nantucket a nice, beautiful place. The question is, I live here year round. I don't have any investment homes out here. And, I'm not reaching into your community and saying how I want you to set your rules. So we're all working together to make it happen on the island. So I appreciate your feedback.
Okay. Anybody else have any comments on our committee? Yes, Delano?
Yes, Delano, I just have a very quick question, and that is, Mr. Chairman, and it's really to Tobias and Julia, I guess, what is the best way for us to contact you? Is there an email, a telephone number?
There's an email and a phone number on the website, and you can certainly contact us there.
And I know Kathy expressed concerns that you don't respond to that. Is there some way to make sure that we can connect?
Honestly, if you call, I think you have a great chance of getting a response. And
okay.
Email my first initial, then last name at actnow.org.
Excellent.
I copied on some of the group emails. That's a sure way to get response.
Let me just thank you again. Thank you for being part of this. Thank you for listening to us. I really do think there's a way to distinguish between the Marriotts and the commercial folks and people like us. And it shouldn't be that difficult to design that. But like Robin, I'm kind of new to this as well, and we're going to have to figure this all out. So thank you again. And thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Doug Rose, you have something to add, please?
Yeah, thank you, Gary, and thank you, the whole board and Julia and Tobias. I have not participated in many of these meetings in the past, and I have to say I've learned a lot from listening into all of you, and I think I have a deeper appreciation of how complicated this is. I also agree with whoever said it. I'm looking at everybody on this screen, and I'm feeling reassured that it feels as though everybody here does have the long-term interests of the island in mind, and this is not something where they're purely looking out for their own self-interest. So I'm reassured by that. Two things. One, I reacted positively to, I think, something, Gary, you had said about the thought of grandfathering. I think that might be a really interesting solution to some of what has been discussed here. I don't know the legalities and wherewithals of all that, so I'm sure it's complicated, but that was an appealing idea to me. And then the second one was really more of a, I guess, a comment or a question for the Act Now folks to consider, which is, are the limits that are being imagined enough to really stand in the way of a Marriott who has enormous resources, and the idea of having them go through one or two little hoops may not be enough of a deterrent. Thank you. So as much as the folks that have a stake in the island are concerned about being limited, I would almost look in the reverse. While you're doing that, I'd look in the reverse angle and say, are we doing enough to really prevent the nightmare of corporate involvement in investment properties? So those are my thoughts. Thank you so much for letting me chime in.
Okay,
So, I guess I would just say that we already have corporate involvement, right? Marriott's a bigger, scarier thing, but we already have corporate involvement at different scales on the island. So clearly we haven't done enough, right? And I appreciate the conversation, all of the suggestions. We ourselves as a group went through many different things, including we talked about grandfather, and I know we've spent a ton of time today. I would love to give you maybe a little bit more background on why we didn't go with this or that option. There are definitely good reasons, I think. And it's not to say that we believe that this is the perfect, there is never going to be a perfect proposal. Anytime we anyone puts a bylaw forward, it's never perfect. But, and does it do enough to fend off corporate, investors? And that's really the basis of the 6-week proposition. 6 weeks was sort of like, okay, gives folks who want to offset expenses enough, but doesn't make it so that it is a profitable business. And that, without the ability to distinguish between a corporate owner and a summer resident, there literally isn't an ability to do that. And as far as our team and our legal folks who are, municipal lawyers / land use, they're very knowledgeable people. There is no ability to do that, but we will continue, and I will go back and we will ask the question again, and we will, spend time looking at it again. But we've sort of been down this road, and this is why we proposed what is in front of you.
Robin?
Thanks, Gary. Just a quick feedback, Julia. Everybody on this call, again, the non-residents contribute 88% of the tax revenue of the town. Everyone on this call who does short-term rentals would either be materially impacted, or in Kathy's case, your bylaw would eliminate all of their business. So take that feedback. And this is a small representation of those who are aware of the 1,800 plus homes that are aware of what you're doing. So you keep going back and forth saying, well, we've been there, we've done that, but we are giving you feedback that this is too draconian, and this is hurting everybody on this call unduly.
Thanks, Robin. So what I think, we finished our discussion. It's been great to have a terrific discussion about this. Peter, what I was thinking is that let's give Act Now a little help by forming our own little subcommittee, a little legal subcommittee, where we can come up with perhaps a way to realize the distinction that we have been urging them to try to come up with. They'll do their own homework, but we happen to have a few lawyers who are members of this committee, including Bill Gardner and Peter Hall and our vice chairman as well. So should we agree to do that? Come up with a little subcommittee?
That I so move.
Okay, all in favor of our committee? Everybody's up? Great. Is approved. Okay, so we'll do a little thinking. This committee will do a little thinking about it, and hopefully we'll come up with some good ideas for you to figure out how Act Now can satisfy some of these concerns without gutting what you're hoping to accomplish.
Mr. Beller, I would encourage you, I appreciate you wanting to spend some time on this, and I would say, if you have you definitely, we'll have a bunch of questions. And so before you get too deep in the conversation, it might be good to just have a conversation about a little bit deeper into, what we see from the registry, what we're seeing for
Okay.
what parameters we really looked at. And so, just to give you context and whatnot.
Okay. All right. Well, we're going to have our little team take a little look, and then we'll get in touch with you and
Great.
ask if there's some more facts that we need. All right. If that's the end of that discussion, I think that
Peter is asking to speak.
who?
Peter Holly.
No,
I don't see him on the,
His hand is up.
oh, I'm
I'm
sorry.
sorry, I must have been scratching my head or something.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Thank you, Bill.
If not, I thank you all for your participation this morning. I want you all to stay safe. I've had my first vaccination shot. Old people like me in Florida are able to get it, so I got mine and my wife got hers, but good luck to all of you in getting yours eventually. Anyone want to make a motion to adjourn?
I adjourn, make a motion.
Second? All in favor? Aye. All right, thank you all.
Wait, Gary, one other thing. Do we need to figure out when we will meet next? Do we need to set a date?
Okay,
And then what speakers we want to get so we can have that set up?
well,
2 weeks?
you want to set a date in 2 weeks? And we'll see if we have one of our potential speakers who will show up. So let's set 2 weeks from now as a likely date. And then Kathy, we'll talk about some of the people that we might want to get back. I don't know if you want to try to get John Brescher back to talk about the town government.
Yeah, and we also had Rob Ranny on the list.
Yeah, you might be able to get Rob Rainey to talk about the steamship line.
Mhm. I didn't know if there were any others, like we had Mary Ann Stanton at one point. I don't know if she was still on the list.
No, let's just stick with those two for now. Okay, now can we have a motion to adjourn?
I motion to re-adjourn.
Okay, second. Someone seconding it? Second. Good, all in favor? Okay, meeting adjourned. Thank you all. Once again, stay safe.
Bye, thank you.
Thanks.